What's going on, guys? Dare here with Fantasy Football Advice, coming at you with another fantasy football video. Today, we're giving you those sell high targets. Unlike the video that we had yesterday, these aren't going to be any sort of league winners. These are just your regular weekly sell high targets. And the reason for that is because when predicting defenses, it's really easy to have defenses that fall off. It's really difficult to have defenses that improve throughout the season. So what could be a bad matchup with one key injury on a defense could end up being a good matchup. So if you're trading away players because they have a tough schedule, you're playing with fire. On the flip side, with these bottom 5 pass defenses and you're talking about targeting a wide receiver, odds are those defenses aren't going to improve unless a key player returns from injury. But most of these teams, they're just bad with their starters, so it's completely different. These are just the sell high targets for week 9. But before we do get into the video, make sure you're following both Nick and I on time now. I know a lot of people have been holding on to him since the draft and are excited that he's finally producing, and hey, I'm an owner myself. I have plenty of shares of Johnson, and even with his recent success, there has always been some underlying issues. First off, Theo Riddick, he's been out the past 2 weeks, paving the way for Kerryon Johnson in the receiving game. As of today, at least the time of recording, this is Wednesday, he is back at practice in a limited basis, but when he returns, there's a very strong chance that he gets re-involved in this offense, especially in the receiving game. And I know we all like to put on those rose-colored lenses when it comes to our fantasy players, but to think that because Kerryon Johnson has been playing so well in that area means that Theo Riddick's role will just completely go away, it's foolish to think that. And what that is going to do is take away Kerryon Johnson's current safe floor. So if you're talking about a guy whose floor is decreasing and he never really had a ceiling to begin with, remember, running backs, we want those touchdowns. The touchdowns, they present upside. The receptions, those are the floors. And as it stands today, Kerryon Johnson has just 1 touchdown on the season, and it's really difficult to expect him to turn that around. He has had a few goal line touches, but LeGarrette Blount has been much better near the goal line. And as much as we hate to admit it, the NFL teams, they don't care about your fantasy points. They want to score actual points. And so far, Blount has gotten it done, and he has proven year over year to be one of the better goal line and short yardage backs in the league. And that's not the only issue. There's also the upcoming schedule. His big explosion game came against Miami, who is currently ranked 29th in points allowed at the position. In the following week against a tougher run defense in Seattle, he struggled. He actually went 8 for 22 for a measly 2.75 yards per carry. He obviously made up for that in the receiving game, but long term we don't know if he will be receiving as much work in the passing game. So looking ahead, the next 4 games he has is Vikings, Panthers, and the Bears twice. So believe it or not, Seattle's actually the worst run defense of the bunch, and Seattle's the one that limited him to 8 for 22. The other 3 defenses that I just listed are all inside the top 10. So right now everyone wants a piece of KJ, and that's why I am completely open to trading him, because I know people are going to pay up. But when you're talking about a guy who's lacking a ceiling and has a questionable long-term floor to go along with an upcoming schedule that's actually difficult, if you give me a chance to cash out riding on a high, I'll do that all day long. The next player on this list is the only wide receiver on the list, and that is Sammy Watkins. And even though I added him here, I'm not saying that this game was a total outlier. He has exploded on a few occasions this year, but the reason he leads this list at the receiver position is because Tyreek Hill is currently dealing with a groin injury. Groin injuries, they can linger. So that means you're just not dumping a player off who's coming off of a big game. And whenever I think of potential players to trade, I always try to find situations that are appealing to both trade partners and myself, because if you're in any sort of competitive league, people can see right through most sell high candidates unless you're smart about packaging them in. But for Watkins' situation, it's a little bit different. He is going to be a temporary number 1 receiver on one of the league's best offenses, and that is a very fantasy friendly situation. As it stands today though, there is no information on how long Hill will be out or if he's going to be out for any time at all. But with groin injuries, typically they're about 2, 3, 4 weeks, and similar to hamstring injuries, they can be easily re-aggravated. And for a speed guy like Tyreek Hill, there's just no way I can see them rolling him out unless he takes at least a couple weeks off. They need him when it counts, and if they don't take this seriously, they're not going to have him in the playoffs. But back to Watkins though, the next 3 matchups that he has should be very positive for fantasy points, and we're at the point of the season where people need to win now. So if I'm looking for a potential trade partner, I'm looking for a guy with a lot of receivers that are on bye weeks. I'm looking for a guy that has a really bad record who's still trying to squeak into the playoffs, and I'm not looking for the whole kitchen sink in return for him. I know he's just a short-term rental who has wide receiver 3 or flex value long-term, but there's some high upside players players that people have on the bench or that are coming back from injury that you can definitely target. So take advantage of it. Send out some offers with Watkins this week. The next player on this list is LeSean McCoy, and the last glimmer of hope that I had for McCoy was just the hope that he would get traded. And at this point, there's nothing left to look forward to. He isn't coming off a monster game, but it was his best game of the season. So if there ever was a time to trade him, it's going to be now. It very well likely could be his best game of 2018, and he only scored 15.5 PPR points. Nathan Peterman is set to start, and the Bills face the Chicago Bears. This game is going to be a nightmare. So basically, the time to unload McCoy is now, and although he isn't going to get you anything huge in return, or at least not anything close to his draft day price tag, he has nothing left to offer your team with no upside, and I would take nearly anything in return to get him off my roster. A one-for-one deal doesn't necessarily make sense, but an example of an RB I would want in return, if I was to do some sort of combination of a running back wide receiver for running back wide receiver deal, I'd be looking to get Royce Freeman. Yes, he isn't a full-time starter, but he is one of the league's best handcuffs, and if you're really in a pinch, you know that you can start him. And so far this season, he has faced the highest percentage of stack boxes, coming in at 54.93%, and has still averaged 4.4 yards per carry against loaded boxes. Not to mention, if you watched yesterday's video, I said Phillip Lindsay was a great target because he has an incredible playoff schedule. Well, if anything happens to Lindsay, who gets that playoff schedule? None other than Royce Freeman, who has been spectacular on the ground. And when we're talking league winning upside, it's all there. Obviously, if you're playing fantasy, we're looking for starters in trades, but when you're talking about trading someone like McCoy, who is best left on the bench anyways, the floor really isn't that important to me. I would much rather have the player with the higher ceiling through the final 8 weeks, and to me, that's Freeman, and that's what's most important to me. Moving on, we have the very first tight end to make the trade targets list, and he's the sell high, and that is Eric Ebron of the Indianapolis Colts. And I understand the tight end position is really thin, and Ebron has been a stud for those of you who grabbed him off waivers. In fact, in 8 games, he's had 7 touchdowns and is one of the few tight ends to have actually had a 100-yard game. And it's not the issue that he hasn't produced up to this point. The real concerning factor to me was the amount of routes that he ran while Jack Doyle was back and healthy. He only ran 10 routes. Compare that to Jack Doyle's 20, and I'm going to take notice. Don't get me wrong, it's not necessarily a death sentence. He was still targeted on 30% of his routes, which is impeccable, and clearly he's a primary weapon in the red zone. But I do think the days of Eric Ebron being a top 3 tight end are over as long as this team stays healthy. But unlike McCoy, I'm not saying to liquidate him. Remember, we're talking about a position where it's touchdown or bust, and Ebron is likely going to remain a back-end tight end 1 down the stretch. But the reason you're selling him is because the pace that he's on has a really strong chance to decline. And remember, his massive 31.5 point game, that came while both T.Y. Hilton and Jack Doyle were out. And 31.5 points, that's a total of 27% of his total fantasy points on the season. And look around your league. Everyone values the safety of starting 1 tight end for the entire season. Yeah, it's easy. Yeah, it makes you feel comfortable. But to me, it's just not necessary. I've never understood that, especially in a year like this one where the position is much deeper than it usually is. We have the emergence of last year's rookies like O.J. Howard and Njoku and Kittle. Then guys who have really stepped it up like Austin Hooper and Jared Cook. And if I'm being completely honest, I would even be happy with trading away Eric Ebron and just picking up Jack Doyle off of waivers, who is currently only owned in 39% of leagues. But before we do move on, one thing worth noting is that Eric Ebron is on bye, so if you need to wait until after his bye to trade him, that's fine too, but I already wouldn't hesitate to throw some offers out there as it stands today. The last player on this list is Latavius Murray. In the past 2 weeks, Latavius Murray has been an absolute force, and heading into this week, I'd expect that trend to continue. News is, Dalvin Cook is rumored to be held out past the week 10 bye, which means there's about 1 good week left of Murray production before things get a little dicey. And when it comes to short-term rentals, I always like to trade them away a week to 2 weeks in advance before the starter returns, because if you wait too long, they lose all their value. Nobody's going to want Latavius Murray if they know Dalvin Cook's coming back the following week. But the difference between Latavius Murray and other handcuffs like a TJ Yeldon is that in this offense, there is a lot less mouths to feed. There's just Dalvin Cook and Latavius Murray. That's it. And to say that Cook coming back and re-injuring himself, or Latavius Murray just doing a good enough job to retain somewhat of a workload isn't in the range of outcomes is just completely false. There is a scenario where Latavius Murray is a dominating force in playoffs. And if you look at what he's done the past 2 weeks, I'd say he's played well enough to deserve some extra playing time. But me personally, I'm not holding out on that hope. I'm going to let somebody else do it. And I'm looking to get rid of Murray this week with no questions asked. You have Barkley, DJ, Mixon, Yeldon, and Mack on bye. All these guys have been starting for teams, and similarly to Sammy Watkins, there's a lot of teams out there that could use some immediate points. And if you're wondering who to target in this type of transaction, I'd look for somebody with more long-term value, someone that people don't trust in their lineups as it is, like an Aaron Jones or a Matt Breida. Even if it takes a 2-for-1, just try to get an upgrade at the position. It's going to help you more than just a few weeks. But that's going to do it for this video, guys. We really hope you enjoyed. If you did, please hit that like button. If you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button. We thank you all for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one.